back. WNST, Taos, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We're in the new studio. Looks like the old studio. Haven't shaved. Bruises and muscle aches and stuff from moving. But, I'll tell you what, you get moved in. The minute you move in, the Ravens decide to part ways with the defensive coordinator 5 o'clock on Friday. Then you spend Saturday and Sunday sitting around on a stream, no less. And I do not recommend streaming for anyone who seriously wants to watch sports. Of 4 of the greatest football games maybe ever played, maybe one of the great division round weekends ever, but certainly the Sunday night game. Luke, we're not at a lack of football things, even though we don't have a bus trip to Foxborough or Cincinnati or Kansas City this week, right?
No question. I mean, while some teams are firing or parting ways mutually with their defensive coordinator at 6 p.m. on Friday, I'll mind you, not 5 p.m. There were teams still playing football and playing really good football over the weekend. And it's not maybe, it was definitely one of, if not the best divisional round I've ever seen. That was fantastic. I know plenty of football fans talk about divisional round weekend being the best because you get the 2 games on each day of the weekend. And, you've filtered out some of the wild card teams, and especially now with 7 teams in each conference making it, I think we can all agree, that Pittsburgh team didn't belong in the playoffs in the same way the Ravens wouldn't have belonged in the playoffs if they had somehow snuck in week 18. But you kind of, you filter it out a little bit and you get the final 4 in each conference. And boy, all 4 of these games, I think, clearly the main event was Buffalo, Kansas City, and we'll talk about that one in more detail. But all 4 of these games in their own way really provided some entertainment. You saw some really good defense in some of these games. You saw some incredible or not so incredible special teams in the case of the Green Bay Packers.
Coaching decisions, tons of
coaching decisions. No question about it. But what did we find with all 4 of these games? You had a game-winning field goal at the gun in 3 of them. And then in the Buffalo-Kansas City game, you had, just an extraordinary back and forth of the final 2 minutes of regulation and then overtime. And this will spark plenty of conversation, already has, in terms of the overtime rules and should we tweak those? I think the common denominator for anyone there, whether you're okay with sudden death or whether you'd like to see something that has a little more fairness in terms of each team getting possession. I think everyone just wanted to see the Chiefs and Bills keep playing because it was that good. That was, Mahomes, Josh Allen was every bit as great as the best moments of Brady Manning going back 10, 15 years ago. So, it was a ridiculously fun weekend in that way. But as we mentioned, it started, bringing it back locally to the Ravens, started with the announcement after 2 weeks of silence from the brass. Forget about state of the Ravens. We haven't heard from John Harbaugh even, let alone Eric DeCosta or Steve Bisciotti since they lost to Pittsburgh on January 9th.
Well, you had to know losing 6 games in a row, Harbaugh was going to be an off-season jerk. You know what I mean? Like that it was not going to sit well, that it was going to be tumultuous. They've never lost 6 games in a row. Harbaugh probably feels like, hey, if Lamar goes out there and underperforms next year, I'm out here. I'll be looking at the Michigan job, let my brother gets out of there or whatever, because 6 losses in a row, every time they lose, he's in a bad mood. I can't imagine how this is going to go the next 6 or 7 months, especially with all the questions they have. We've talked about all of that, but this new era where their PR director is emeritus golfing in Hilton Head, South Carolina, and they're doing the sleaziest Friday 6 p.m. news. It's unprofessional, and it's not in the spirit of the way the organization had run the first 20 years. The last 5 years have been a lot different. Ever since the Ray Rice rape thing, or the punch thing, excuse me, I think there's been a change in everything, in the way that they do things, in the way they want to communicate with their fans. 6 o'clock Friday night, this is the way. To me, it's embarrassing. And they're better than that. They should be better than that. They have nothing to hide from, nothing to run, losing 6 games in a row. They spend their off seasons getting better. But 6 o'clock, dumping your defensive coordinator on divisional weekend, PU.
And not making anyone available over the weekend to answer questions about it. I'm not going to disagree with anything you really said just now. I think what's interesting about this is, first of all, Wink Martindale led a top 10 defense from 2018 through 2020. They allowed the fewest points in the league over those 3 years. So I guess my question, and I wrote this at BaltimorePositive.com on Saturday morning after kind of digesting and taking 12 hours to kind of process this happening, is if Wink doesn't get a mulligan, who really deserves one? And look, we talked about this at the end of the season. We talked about this before the season even ended. When you have as many injuries as they had, when you lose your best defensive player in, what was it, week 13, I guess it was, Marlon Humphrey at the end of the first Pittsburgh game, when you lose Lamar Jackson the week after that, and what ends up being a season-ending injury in the context of not making the playoffs and not knowing if he would have been able to come back if they had made it to January and playoff football. But I think everyone, you kind of look at those final 5-6 games and you say, well, yeah, I mean, they were a very depleted team. But you lose 6 in a row. There is that question. And I wrote it and we talked about it at the end of the season. You have to find that balance between at least what you think is reacting and overreacting. And I think the big question that everyone's been waiting to hear some answers on is how does the brain trust view this football team right now? Is it a half full scenario? And you look at where they were at 8-3 and atop the AFC going into that Pittsburgh game. Or do you view it in a half empty scenario and say, there's some issues here and there's some big things we need to fix? And I think what's interesting about this, Nestor, and to go back to what you were talking about, how we hadn't heard from the organization, no season ending press conference, through the 2 weeks post, the end of the season is.
And the owner's going to hide because they've allowed that now. Now the owner hides. The owner doesn't talk to the fans anymore. It's insane.
But my question is, and based on everything I had heard, because believe me, I'm asking, and other people covering the team on a regular basis are asking, hey, when's John going to talk? When's Eric going to talk? Is Steve going to talk? Understanding you're not expecting that at this point after going on 4 years now. But the overall impression I had gotten at the end of that first week was all 3 coordinators are coming back. My understanding is that the season-ending meeting that they held the day after the Pittsburgh loss, all 3 coordinators spoke. This wasn't a case where Wink was, kind of isolated from the team or kind of been, shut out or pushed, anything like that. It seemed like everything was moving ahead. So we know that the Ravens had their, the Brain Trust had their postseason summit, this past weekend going into when you make that change 12 days out for someone who, and let's call a spade, their defense was bad this year. There's plenty that you could talk about here that no one should be implying that Wink was beyond reproach. At the same time, understanding, he lost Marcus Peters 3 days before the season, never played a snap. They lost Marlon Humphrey going into early December. They had other guys that missed extended periods of time. There was a lot that went wrong, but the idea that this happened 12 days out, the logical question here, Nestor, has to be, was this a John only decision, or was this driven by some other people in the organization thinking, okay, do we need to go in another direction? And I know people will talk about the fact that he had 1 year left on his deal. Wink wants to be a head coach. I understand all the other variables at work, but if you really wanted the guy back, you bring him back and you work it out in that way. So I think that's where this is interesting in terms of where it's going. And I think, as much as I'll freely admit I wouldn't have done this, I think you can look back at the course of the season. And let's be clear, everything that happened over the final 6 games of the season, I don't think that's what drives change. I really don't, because of the state of where they were. Specifically talking about, if you're talking about Wink, the defense, if you're talking about the offense and Greg Roman, Lamar Jackson didn't play essentially the final 5 games. So anyone who's talking about that, or I've seen some people talk about Wink's comments about Joe Burrow, if they made the change because of that, then shame on them. That's dumb. I don't think that's what drives the change here. If you want to go back and look at a period of time during the season that I thought was pivotal, and you would say maybe was a little more of an indictment on Wink, go back to starting with the Miami game. Recall, busted coverage at the end of each half. That led to 10 points. They lost by 12. The following week in Chicago, they're playing without Lamar Jackson. Keep in mind the 4th and 11 play with Andy Dalton. Chris Westry left out on an island on that play. They go cover 0. Now, they came back and won. John Harbaugh talked about it the next day. Seemed forgiving, but I think what was interesting on the heels of that, then 2 weeks later, the Pittsburgh game, after being in the post-game locker room down in the bowels of Heinz Field, asking John Harbaugh, what happened to your defense? Because recall, they had held Ben Roethlisberger and the Steelers to 3 points through 3 quarters. And then they score 17 on their final 3 possessions. And I asked John, did you think the defense got tired? Did Pittsburgh make some kind of an adjustment? And you can go back and look at it. John flat out said, well, they kept getting us in 0 coverage. You keep going to that well, they're going to get you. That was some shade at Wink Martindale. And let's be very clear about this. Any coaching staff, any head coach, any coordinator, you're going to have healthy debate. You're going to have disagreements. You're going to have arguments. Any group that's worth its salt, you don't want yes men. You want guys that are going to push and you're going to have disagreements. So,
and by the way, the head coach has to go out and answer questions after the game
immediately.
The defensive coordinator made a call that he may or may not have agreed with, that worked or didn't work. Maybe he didn't agree with it and it worked. Maybe, but either way, if you're John, and this is what John's so good at, is going out there and selling the ish, going out there and saying whatever he says, which is not much of much, but certainly saying, well, we're never going to tell you who made that call. I made that call. Wink made that call. Chuck whoever made the call. Doesn't matter. We made the call. The Ravens made that's part of being the coach, is never saying who really made the decision. It was a team decision that we made. And that's everything that happens in football. That's every call and then every responsibility of alignment, assignment, and technique to know the alignment, know the assignment, and be there to make the tackle on defense. And when that doesn't happen, people like you and me ask questions, and a lot of times there aren't answers. A lot of times there are, hey, safety read it wrong, moved moved left instead of moved right. But you're not going to hear Wink say, oh, that was on, my 5th round draft pick that we picked, Brandon Stevens, that we didn't even want on the field at that point. They never do that. But you do know behind closed doors, there's one person making calls and everybody else in the locker room questioning whether it was the right call or not. I mean, and that's the 11 guys on the field are questioning in real time. Should we be in 0? Should we be in 1? Where should we, I don't like this call, but I'm going to go play it. And then the ball goes over your head, right?
Right. But that's why I said that was telling to me after that first Steelers loss. The direct quote, and again, you can check this out at BaltimorePositive.com as I opined on the Ravens, quote, mutually parting ways with Wink Martindale. But the quote that John Harbaugh gave, because I asked him the question, had the defense worn down? Had Pittsburgh done something in the 4th quarter that kind of took you guys, out of your element, or they changed it up, something you weren't expecting? And it was very direct, very blunt. He said, they hit 0 coverage a couple times. You go to the well too many times and they get you. Well, now he didn't say Wink Martindale specifically. Wink Martindale calls the defense. That was about as public of criticism as you'll get. But did that directly lead to the dismissal? I don't think so. But I think that period of time and everything that happened after the fact, I think what this really boils down to, if you're asking me, and again, we haven't heard from people in the organization, we'll hear John speak in very flattering terms of Wink, as he should. Wink did a very good job. And, we'll get into start talking about candidates and, whether it's Joe Witt from the Cowboys, or whether it's someone internal like Anthony Weaver or Chris Hewitt, or they bring Mike McDonald back from the University of Michigan, whoever it might be. It's going to be a very real question if they do as good of a job as Wink Martindale did over the last 4 years in terms of the entire body of work. But I think what's interesting, Nestor, is you look at how high the ceiling was from 2018 through 2020. Best scoring defense in the league over those 3 years. They had a top 10 defense in terms of DVOA, efficiency, looking at different things like that. However, so you saw the ceiling over those 3 years. I think what you do look at, and what was concerning this year, even acknowledging some of the injuries, is how low the floor was. This team played good defense for stretches, but let's face it, when things went sideways, it was really bad. So do you look at Wink's system if you're evaluating this thing? And this is John, Eric, Steve Bisciotti, Ozzie Newsome, anyone else in the organization talking about this. Is there a sense of maybe it's time to go in a direction where you have someone with a system that has a little bit of a higher floor and can endure losing Marcus Peters? Let's face it, Marlon Humphrey played until early December. They lost Marcus Peters. They didn't have Derek Wolfe. No question, those hurt. Does Marcus Peters take you from being a top 5 defense to being a lousy pass defense, which is what they were this year? That's where you do question and you do look at it and say, you know what? Go back the last couple of years, even go back to last year. They struggled in the fourth quarter. Football Outsiders has a, quote, late and close statistic, which has to do with eight-point games late in the game. How do you play? They were 30th in the NFL in that department this year. However, they were 31st in that department last year. Think back to the Cleveland game, for example, that Monday night game last year. They had, if you looked at it, there were some cracks here and there last year, even though it was still a top 10 profile overall. But then you look at it this year, and my question is, again, you saw the ceiling. However, was there a concern that the floor was a little bit too low this year, that maybe it was a little bit beyond the pale, just how bad the defense was at times? Look, no one should have expected with the injuries that they had. No one should have possibly envisioned or expected a top 10 defense this year. There's no question about that. However, you do look at it. You look at the fact they led the league in 20-yard completions allowed. They led the league in 40-yard completions allowed. I already mentioned the struggles they had in the fourth quarter. I mean, they were a bad defense in the second half. Go all the way back to week 1.
So John and Eric may say those are calls, not players, right? I mean those are bad calls or play, because it always comes down to, you give me better play. You give me Marcus Peters,
sure,
and I'm a top 5 defensive coordinator. If you give me Brandon Stevens and no pass rush and Calais Campbell at the end, and Brandon Williams on one leg, and like you give me that, then all of a sudden we have to play a different way. And I'm sure that was part of the argument. Is it the chicken or the egg? And at this point, John's like, I've been here 15 years. You're the 7th defensive coordinator I've had. We'll just move on. And here's where it is with John. And to me, it's not even about scheme or all that. To some degree, it's about John's coaching tree to some degree at this point, and who's allowed in and who's allowed out and what gets them banished. And I don't think any of us really understand that. But guys in John has a different gig I was talking to Dennis about this last week, about Brian Billick hiring Marvin Lewis and Rex Ryan and these people he didn't even know. John doesn't hire people he doesn't know. It's the exact, John has to know you really well in order for you to come into the building. And John doesn't have a tree that looks like, not even like Bill Belichick's, where guys go and fail. John doesn't have much of a coaching tree in that way for being 15 years into this.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some guys he's hired that he didn't know, but you're right. I mean, and let's be very clear. That's most coaches. Most coaches tend to hire who they know. And that's part of what we talk about in terms of lack of diversity of head coaches. And, in terms of a
white guys hire white guys. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
but it's, again, there's a familiarity there. And look, hey, let's face it. If you hire the wrong defensive coordinator, you hire the wrong offensive coordinator, ultimately it's going to fall on you, especially if you're not 15 years into this thing like John Harbaugh. So there is going to be a sense of, you better trust the guy. And
Billick made himself the offensive coordinator, and
then he was gone a year later, right? Yeah. So I mean, it's tough in that way. But I do really think, and is John going to say this whenever he does talk? Probably not. But I do wonder, when you consider what happened this year, the number of injuries they had. But let's also be realistic about it. Their defense, they spent a lot of money on their defense the last few years. When you have a rookie quarterback and a tight end, a Pro Bowl tight end that was on a rookie deal, and you had offensive tackles that were on rookie deal. I mean, they had a very cheap offensive roster and an expensive defensive roster. So is it going to get any easier rebuilding this defense? Probably not. So the thought is, if the floor was so low this year, maybe philosophically you need to turn the defense into a little bit of a different direction in terms of maybe pull back on the blitzing some, maybe a little more bend but don't break. We don't necessarily expect to be top 3 in the league in scoring defense, but we can't be dead last in pass defense. And did that have something to do with that here? I think that's quite possible. But that said, all of those arguments I just made, would I have done this? No. I think Wink Martindale did a hell of a job. I think he had a really tough out. And, same thing with Greg Roman on the other side, as we've talked about. But John Harbaugh, 12 days later, the Ravens 12 days later, after it seeming that Wink and everyone's going to be back, Wink's not back. So now we look ahead and see who's going to be the next defensive coordinator of the Ravens. By the way, they've never hired externally except for the very beginning, Marvin Lewis in 1996. So the money would be on someone internal, but that's not to say that they're not going to look outside the organization and see who might fit that description of who they want.
Football games all weekend, and now a long week and some Sunday and some Super Bowl. Luke Jones can be found at Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere we are. Our friends at Royal Farms powering up some morning coffee and some wise conversations around here. We're going to get the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back out on the road, presented by the Maryland Lottery very, very soon. End of January, little transition, little moving, some things going on, and certainly some transition for the Ravens. We're going to come back, talk more about that, and a great weekend of football. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking. Baltimore, positive.